Now, today is the 5th anniversary of the explosion at the Deepwater Horizon oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico, in which 11 people were killed and caused one of the worst environmental disasters of the last decade. The explosion left huge stretches of the Gulf soiled with 200 million gallons of petroleum gushing out from the site for 87 days. It cost BP, the UK oil company that owned the well, $42 billion in fines, clean-up and compensation. And with me in the studio to discuss this story is the artist and environmental campaigner, Mel Evans. Mel, welcome to the programme. Tell me a bit about the work that you do and why do you look in particular at the petroleum industry?
So, taking today as a really important moment, 5 years since the Deepwater Horizon disaster, what we've seen is that for the communities, the fisher folk, the whole stretch of the Gulf Coast of Mexico, the damage of that accident has continued that whole time. That is irreversible harm that's been caused. Meanwhile, for BP, it's managed somehow to come through. Yeah, it's had criminal convictions, it's had the largest fines in US history, but it's somehow pulling through. And one of the ways in which it does that is through cleaning up its public image through associations with the arts, like massive cultural institutions in London, such as British Museum or Tate. So what a lot of artists are concerned about right now is the way in which the oil industry is using the arts to, what I would call in my book, artwash its public image, and that is unacceptable for our cultural institutions, our most loved and prestigious cultural institutions, to associate themselves with big oil in this way.
OK, well, let me just quickly give right of reply to both Tate and BP, as they're not here on the programme. So, in a statement, Tate said, BP is one of the most important sponsors of the arts in the UK, supporting Tate as well as several other leading cultural institutions. It fits in with their guidelines of this policy. Its support is instrumental in helping Tate to develop its collection and helps the work of a wide range of artists. And according to BP, they said that they are proud with their long-standing arts partnerships and the investment of BP of almost £10 million for a further 5-year period to a number of different major cultural institutions in the UK represents a significant long-term corporate investment. Now, some would argue that BP, yes, as you mentioned, have paid fines, they have been convicted. We're never going to stop extractive industries from digging, from mining, from sucking out oil. This is something, unfortunately, that is here to stay as the global population continues and our demands continue. However, how do we go about mitigating against circumstances like that? According to BP and also American Petroleum, a number of things have been put in place to try and prevent a disaster like this from happening. So you have, for example, she says, looking for her notes here, better equipment, more emergency team responses in case a spill like this is likely to happen. New standards have been put in place. And on top of that, they're saying that the number of injuries as a result of working on oil rigs has dropped because safety standards have been put in place.
But let's look at what's actually happening. And that's that, even just in the past month, there's been several massive oil disasters around the world. This is happening all the time, the kind of spills that are happening. Shell's operations in Nigeria alongside Chevron, they have spills in Nigeria that are the same size as the Deepwater Horizon.
You're never going to stop a spill, unfortunately. That is something that lots of analysts have said. Like, even if they had all the will in the world, that was inevitably going to happen. BP's failing, perhaps, was that they didn't respond quickly enough, apologise for what happened, and try and stop this from pumping out oil for 87 days.
But what we're seeing globally at the moment is that over 50% of extractive projects receive opposition from local communities. And at the same time, internationally, there's a growing movement around cultural divestment, around financial divestment from the fossil fuel sector. So we've seen Stanford University, Glasgow University, both commit to divest from fossil fuels. And the way in which artists are speaking out against oil sponsorship of the arts is in parallel with those things, those massive sections of society that are criticising the industry and actually saying, no, we won't stand for this any longer. Desmond Tutu has called for a cultural boycott and a kind of apartheid-style boycott of the fossil fuel industry.
Do we need to target governments rather than necessarily the petroleum industries? Because at the end of the day, it's the governments that are giving away contracts. For example, the US has collected $7.4 billion in revenue just in domestic production of petroleum. Within African countries, we know that there is a lot of corruption that happens, and oil contracts are often given out to petroleum companies. So yes, petroleum companies are sort of the enemy, as it were, to conservation and people who care about the planet. But surely governments need to take some responsibility here.
There's definitely, you know, a kind of collaboration, a kind of behind closed doors operations that are going on between government and industry that, you know, do undermine the kind of democratic processes that people are engaged in to try and challenge these projects. You know, at the same time, the way that the arts have a role in that is one of the things that we want to question, because it's through the arts that BP, Shell, like them, gain access to key government figures. It's through their sort of corporate events that they gain this kind of access. And actually what artists are saying is, hold on a second, they're hardly giving any money. It's actually a tiny, like less than 0.5% of Tate's income comes from BP. Massive amount of that income comes from the taxpayer. It comes in a direct government grant.
What would you like to see done then?
What we want to see is for cultural institutions across the UK, especially in London, where the big oil companies are only targeting the largest institutions because that's who they get prestigious association from. We want to see all of them end these sponsorship deals. You know, Tate ended tobacco sponsorship in 1986, well before it was made illegal, and they need to lead the way forward on this issue as well.
Is it not better to work with extractive industries so that you're able to have an open dialogue? If we shut them out completely, do we not then run the risk of them going ahead and doing things? I mean, as a conservationist, I have a master's in primatology, and one of the things that is of a big interest to primatologists is how drilling in national parks is done and the effects that it have on the biodiversity. Now, if you completely alienate extractive industries, you don't get any dialogue. Scientists need to talk to them to say, right, we're not going to stop you from drilling. This is the least disruptive thing that you can do, but we need to maintain that outlet, don't we?
Well, let's look at where we're at. It's 2015. There's massive climate talks, which some people have a lot of hope about the success of in Paris at the end of this year. We've got cultural institutions making ethical statements around climate change, around sustainability, trying to change their practices according to the climate challenge that we're all trying to deal with in some way at the moment. Now, the corporate lobby, the oil lobby around climate change has had very negative impacts on movement around trying to tackle climate change. And I think the cultural institutions have to ask ourselves, well, what does the future hold? And how do we use these public galleries as a space to imagine that future? You know, there will be a point where we use a lot less fossil fuels than what we use right now. And their business models will have to change completely. And so looking to the climate talks at the end of this year, you know, we have to start taking action now.
Tell me very briefly, you have a new book coming out which is based on or looking at the petroleum industry. What is that?
The book's called Artwash, Big Oil and the Arts, and it looks at the ways oil companies around the world are trying to use the arts to sort of find a new place for themselves within the 21st century, to greenwash to artwash, as I call it, their public image, to try and survive the criticism that they're under at the moment, which is, you know, growing, as I say, through the divestment movement, through the movement to end oil sponsorship of the arts. And so the ways in which artists are coming together and using different creative forms to challenge the industry in the galleries is really astonishing. It's really growing, and I think we'll see some big changes soon.
OK, Mel Evans, thanks for coming in.
Thanks.